Hello guys, I don't know if anybody's in yet, but we should be live. I'm just sending the link to Scott now. Bear with me one moment. Just bear with me folks. I know you can't, or a lot of you won't be able to, can't see the chat at the moment because I haven't linked that in. I've got to do all this now, where I would normally do all this behind the scenes, but bear with me. I'm now going to find the video. Good, I can see some of you coming in. Let me just get the video a moment. So they can get the chat up, otherwise that's not going to help matters. I've sent Scott the link. What a palaver. So let's get the chat. Great, need that. Who said live streaming was fun? Right, okay, so if I don't need to pause, that's fine, shrink that down, and I just need to do one more thing. So Scott is here, I believe. Hi Scott. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. I can hear you. Right.
Okay.
Just stand by a second. I just need to tie in a couple of chat things a bit. We are live, okay? So just bear with me one moment.
Okay, no problem.
YouTube chat. There we are, folks. I think. Let me just test this with. Yes, we are sorted. Right, let's bring Scott back. Right, let's hope this one stays. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. Can you all hear Scott okay? Is that better?
Can you hear me okay? There, now I can hear you. You got your
microphone. Sorry, I had the microphone behind me because I was trying to do all of this stuff. Okay. Your microphone is not correct, Scott.
What, they can't hear me?
Can you hear Scott, guys?
You can hear
me,
right?
Yeah, they got you. That's fine. Okay. Perfect. Okay, let's get on with the live.
The wonders of live video.
Oh, mate, I know. It's typical, isn't it? Well, I was chatting away for a little bit, and I covered a bit of some of the stuff that I've been up to before I lost all of that software, all of that B-roll and stuff. I was gutted. It's like 5 videos worth of B-roll gone. So, and of course, it's always the stuff that you can't redo.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, oh, never mind. It is what it is.
Yeah, I've just gotten in the habit of doing a clip and rewatching it immediately, because I've had a couple times where I've done an entire shoot and go to edit and there's a background noise or there's something wrong with the disc, and so not all the files transfer.
That wasn't the problem. That wasn't the problem for me. I filled the disc, okay, the memory card. I thought, right, I'm going to have to go home and empty this, put it in the computer. All the files came up, went to drag them into a folder like that, and it went memory card corrupt. I was like, oh my God, just as I was copying the whole lot across. So it's my fault, but it is what it is. We learn from our mistakes, just like gardening, innit? So, right. Oh, so Danny's saying there's no question box. Give me 1 second on that. This is the problem. All of this stuff you usually do behind. I'm literally just going to put it as questions, guys, all right, for speed. And there you are. You now have a questions box as well Okay. So place your questions in that box for us, guys, and we will get onto it. There's only 82, so we've lost 50 viewers. It's not acceptable,
Well, maybe they'll
guys.
come back after
Not
they figure out.
acceptable. No, I don't know. Well, I didn't want to continue without you because we've been planning to get you
I
on the
appreciate
channel
that.
and stuff. So, right. Okay, let's
You're
have a look
jumping
who's in.
through hoops.
Oh, mate. Well, and the thing is, there's so many little things that you have to set up so that you can pull chat in and stuff like that. It's, it takes a little while, don't it? Well,
Oh yeah.
yourself. So, but it's sorted. That's the main thing. Um, just having a look at what's going on here. Right. Okay. So there's a few people gone back in. So Amelia's here, Danny's back in, Chris is in, Linda, Joanne, Boaty, Lisa, Teresa. There's loads
Good.
getting back in. So
Good.
that's good. Okay. So Scott, what have you been up to this week in your garden?
So you were talking about how you're getting below 10C. Today is actually my first day that it's reached 10C. And so most of what I've been doing has been indoors because it's been so cold and windy. We've been having 50-mile-an-hour winds most days this week.
Yeah.
And so I was actually outside today. One of the things I do this time of year in my frozen Colorado garden is to water the plants that are growing in containers. So I've got blueberries in pots and I've got apple trees in pots. And so as it starts to warm up, I'm out watering all of the containers to make sure they're not dried out, but also testing the soil because that top inch or two has thawed. But in all of my pots, it's still frozen below about 2 inches. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just going through the garden, checking to see the condition of the soil, if I can work in it yet. I've started doing some of the pruning that I saved for the springtime, like cutting down the raspberries and those kind of things. So mostly just cleanup and prep is what I'm focused on.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much where we're going to be discussing today now. And when you're talking about the raspberries, one of the tasks I had, my big fruit cage, last year, the garden to my right had no one on it. And the weeds grew like you wouldn't believe.
Oh,
And
no.
it's just so happens that the wind blew all of that seed into my lovely perennial, fruit garden.
Oh,
And
it's wonderful
yeah,
soil. It's got a good place to grow now.
and they were like triffids. So I literally had to get in there, strip all that out, prune everything back, and get a new bark mulch over the top of it. So that's all sorted now as well. I'm in a really good place at the moment because my garden, because I've been, looking after it for so long,
Mhm.
it's really easy because I'm always putting good quality compost on and everything else. It's really easy for me to weed it really quickly, or to get it back into shape. And it's
Oh,
literally
yeah.
been 3 days up there, and they've been full days. Don't get me wrong, I've been, but those 3 days, and it's I'm not far from being ready, and I've
Oh,
managed to
good.
get a few things done. So that's nice. So we're talking today about some things that people need to be thinking about. So some of the newer gardeners as well, what tasks they can be doing throughout March, because we all know March is the real engine for sowing and stuff like that. That's when things really start kicking off on sowing.
Yep.
Maybe not so much for you in your colder climate, but you are sowing, right?
Well, I'm sowing indoors. It's
Yeah,
still a little too cold to do outdoors. By the end of the month, I may be able to get some peas started and some spinach. Those cold hardy plants that won't mind another snow because I'll have snow even into May in most years. So end of March, beginning of April, yeah, I'll start putting some of those seeds in the ground.
but you are sowing indoors at the moment, like
Yeah,
some of us,
so
yeah.
it's a little bit early. I've sown pepper seeds already. I'm
Yeah.
doing some of the super hot peppers this year.
Hmm.
And actually, I've been really surprised. The germination of those kind of super hot chilies can
Much
take as
longer.
long as a month.
Yeah.
And I've actually got most of the seeds germinated within 2 weeks now. So
Wow.
that's actually the thing I'm focused most on. But I've got some tomatoes that are just starting. I'm going to be doing those indoors in my grow tent and hydroponics. The seeds for The outdoor peppers and tomatoes, I'm still a couple weeks away from starting.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're probably ahead of me. I've got literally just a few chilies sown in my propagator there. And I'm literally about to start sowing everything else. And the reason for that is I've purposely held off sowing things because I know it's going to be cold, and I didn't want to be funding, you know, heating and lighting and everything else for these plants. But
Yeah.
now the light levels are starting to climb on a daily basis, and the temperatures are climbing, even though we're going to have some colder temperatures. Now we can start putting in the colder things like the brassicas and things like
Yeah.
that, and the lettuce and what have you, get those going, and then later on in the month get the tomatoes and stuff like that going properly. And I think that's it. And so let's talk about pruning. So you were
Okay.
saying about pruning your raspberries and stuff.
The raspberries.
Yeah. So what sort of things can people prune now at this exact time?
So this February and March for me and for most gardeners are a great time to start pruning the fruit trees before they bud. So, the winter, the wind, the snow, the rain, whatever you have, if you notice that branches have been damaged on your fruit trees, now's a great time to prune off all those damaged branches. And you can also do some pruning to shape the tree before they start budding when the light and the temperatures both start increasing. Uh, but the canes of all type, now's a good time. The blackberries and the raspberries, the kind of raspberries I grow are the kind that fruit on the first year canes, the prima canes. And so I can cut those down
To the
all the
ground.
way to the ground every year. And that's normally what I do. But if you, even with that type of raspberry or with the other type of summer bearing raspberry, now's the time to top off those plants, get rid of that extra growth from last year. And you can use this time, and it kind of plays in conjunction where you're pruning your canes and then you're also starting to put up whatever wires or whatever twine you've got that you're going to be training those brambles. So I kind of put those two things together.
Yeah.
And then I'm also pruning back. I leave most of my perennial flowers out so that the birds have seeds over the course of the winter. And the same thing, I'm just cleaning all of those plants, cutting them back, and either letting them drop as extra mulch or tossing them into the compost pile.
So you're doing like a chop and drop with them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what I did when I went right through all the cage, and folks will see this in a later episode, is I've cut a lot of it up into small pieces because it's all going to be going into the bottoms of my birdies beds when I'm filling those.
Oh
So
yeah.
I got a video coming on filling those up, and fortunately that's some of the b-roll I haven't lost, so because that was
That's
come off
good.
the card before. So but a lot of that stuff will be going into the bottom of those beds, because these birdies beds are the biggest ones they do. They're like 8 foot by 4 foot by like 4 foot high type of thing. They're huge.
Right.
And I've estimated they'll take just under 3 ton of material. Like, so is, yeah,
Wow.
it's a lot of material. They're so high, but they're
Yeah.
fantastic beds.
Oh yeah.
And they're both built now, and I've got some long ones on order as well, because eventually I will start putting more and more raised beds in and get that structure in place. But it's
Good.
been really nice. So the pruning is good. So I think what a lot of people find with pruning the raspberries, they struggle with like the primocanes and stuff like that, and the autumn and summer fruiting, and you've basically nailed it in that your autumn fruiting varieties you can cut right to the ground, and your
Yeah.
summer fruiting are going to fruit on last year's growth. So
Yep.
and this is the thing that a lot of people struggle with, to tell whether or not the difference is if you've got canes that are dark and brown, and you've got a lighter green or a very pale brown cane, they are going to be your newer canes. You need to cut the
Yeah.
older ones out, and anything else then can go. So that's great. Right, we've got a couple of questions come in, Scott.
Okay.
So, Jordan, Mary Organics, are either of you trying something for the very first time in your gardens this year for fun? So, what about you, Scott?
And so Jordan Marie is one of my favorite new channels. They've just started doing a couple videos, and they're really doing a great job. And so I'm sure he and little Jordan Marie are looking for new ideas of what they're going to be doing. And so I'm I'm trying a few things that are going to be a little bit different in my garden. Different ways of doing vertical gardening. And so I've got a pollinator garden that I've already got established, and I'm going to be putting up uh, a fence, just a real short fence that doesn't go anywhere and doesn't do anything other than give me a backdrop in my flower garden to actually grow some vines. You know, I know in the UK, sweet peas are one of those things that gardeners just love to grow. And here in the States, we really don't do much of those kind of plants. So that's one of the new things I'm planning, is to actually build some new structures so that I can trellis those vining plants like sweet peas. And
Yeah.
I've never done that before.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. It's. I think that's quite a a good way is to get vertical, and it's one of the best ways of increasing your gardening space if you've got a small garden.
Absolutely.
And there's so many plants that will grow vertical. Things like melons and gourds and squash and stuff. All of these things will grow vertically. You just need to
Yeah,
support the
I
fruit.
grow all of my cucumbers vertically. In fact,
Yeah.
I haven't grown cucumbers on the ground laterally for over a decade.
Yeah, that's not so much a popular thing here. We tend to grow them vertically, and I grow them like a tomato on a
Yep,
cordon. So
yep.
so that tends to be how they grow here in the UK, and they are vining plants, so they will sprawl across the floor and still provide the
Mm.
fruit and everything else. So that's cool.
I think that's a big difference between our regions, our countries, is that, you know, here in the States, of course, everybody knows that everybody has a ton of land, but that's not always the case, but that's the assumption that a lot of gardeners, based on the books and the education that we do have here, is that everything is in the ground and everything is growing laterally.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of new gardeners here in the States with small spaces that don't even know about vertical gardening, because it is almost literally a foreign idea when it comes to how we garden.
What I like about vertical gardening is it'll allow you to create rooms within the garden.
Absolutely.
So you get that backdrop, and you walk around it, and all of a sudden you're seeing something else. So it actually draws people into the garden, and it's used massively with like ornamental gardens and things. But but it can be used to great advantage when growing vegetables and things like that as
Mhm.
well. So Danny's asking, Scott, when are you visiting the best country in the world, Wales?
And so I'm planning, and I haven't publicly announced this yet, but I am planning a trip next year to visit Wales and Scotland, and to make it a 3 or 4 week visit. I love that area. Those of the viewers that are regular viewers of mine probably know that I had a career in the U.S. Air Force, and I've been to the UK 4 times in different RAF bases for weeks at a time, and it is a wonderful country. I love it absolutely. I've spent more time in England than I have in Wales or Scotland, and so I want to spend the time in Wales in particular, and visit you. Of course, we got to do videos together in
Yeah.
your garden space. But I'm programming next year. Haven't figured out whether it'll be a spring or an autumn trip, but it's going to happen.
Well, that'll
So
be
thanks for
good.
asking.
That'll be really good because get you down here. Danny's only 45 minutes up the road. And But Wales has some beautiful scenery, especially if you go right west or if you get up into the Brecon Beacons. It's absolutely beautiful, and Brecon's only 40 minutes away from me. It's absolutely stunning up there, so that's great.
And I want to make it a big, not just, going to visit you, but I'd really love to do a garden tour, go see Steve and Eli and Kate
Yeah.
and all the others that are regular people that we're chatting about, like you are, right? See Danny, it's one of those kind of things that's all I'm going to be doing is going to the UK and focus on gardening and maybe a little bit of Scotch.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, do the Scotch first and then bring it down with you.
There you go.
There you go.
There's a
We're
possibility.
sorted. Yeah. I got a big enough shed with a sofa and an armchair in there.
Okay.
Right, so we won't do any gardening. We'll just sit up there and drink that.
I may be spending so much time in the islands and the highlands that I might not make it down to Wales if I do that part of the trip first.
All right. No, you make sure you pick that up and come down then.
Okay.
Right. So the ladies' garden and home. Glad to see you both. What nighttime temperatures should it be before you put your brassicas in an unheated greenhouse?
And so brassicas are ultra hardy, and so some are hardier than others, but almost all of them can handle freezing temperatures. And so if you're starting them indoors, you can put them out into the garden as soon as the soil is warming up to 2 or 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. The soil just needs to be above freezing, but the nighttime air temperature can actually be below freezing, and they'll continue to grow. The biggest issue, and you talked about it briefly, is the light at this time of year. And I've tried growing brassicas in February and March, even in a greenhouse, and there's just not enough light for them to grow. But about mid-March is that tipping point. And so as long as the soil is warm enough and as long as it doesn't get too cold at night, then this is actually about the time you can start thinking about the brassicas in a greenhouse.
Yeah. People have come on to me a few times and said, "Oh, like for next week, for example, now they forecast snow. Snow is an insulator." Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not good. The snow is never going to cause that problem. The big problem is when you get that freezing temperatures and wind for a long period of time, and that's when you have an issue. But as Scott has said, sort of middle March, it should be fine going out, and it should be, worst case scenario, keep the fleece handy and fleece them over if you've got a major frost due. But they are very cold hardy. Anita Hayward, when will you look to sow tomatoes, Tony? I'm holding off. Was going to go till mid-March. I've got heat and light, but I don't want triffids by the time I put them in the tunnel. So I sort of take around 6 to 8 weeks before I know I can put them out, okay? So I'll be probably sowing them some point next week, and that will take me into sort of early May. And I know at that point I can get him in the tunnel because I'm putting mine into a polytunnel, and if I need to, I can fleece them over at night. Yeah. Okay. But early May we should be seeing the back end of the frosts. I know we can get them later in May, but for the last few years that's been pretty rare. It tends to be right up to May, and then we get pretty good weather. We sort of have an early summer, like it's crazy. Yes. But so I'll probably be leaving, putting my first tomatoes in next week some point. I'll be doing a lot of sowing over the next week or two. Mark Shaw, how do you water seedlings, from above or below?
So it varies based on how big the seedlings are. And so I mostly water from below, but as the seed has just started to germinate and those seedlings are very, very small, I'll still water from above. I'll usually use a spray bottle. I don't want to pour water onto those young seedlings, but I want that top half inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch of soil to stay moist for those young seeds that are still developing the roots. But once the seedling is even an inch tall, I move almost exclusively to bottom watering, and especially as the plant starts growing and starts developing the true leaves, I will stop all top watering and allow the very top surface to actually dry out so that I don't get fungus gnats and other fungal problems
Yeah,
that,
damping off
like damping
disease.
off disease.
Yeah,
Oh, there you go. Great minds think alike.
yeah,
If that top surface stays too moist for too long, you get those kinds of issues. So I'll water from the top in the very beginning. Most of the time I leave my dome or my bag over the container to maintain the humidity enough that I don't need to water, and that because the soil is already moist enough from when I sowed the seeds. But once I take the humidity dome off, it's just a couple days of the top watering before the plants usually have a big enough root system that they can start reaching down to the bottom.
yeah. And I'm the same. Initially over the top and then bottom, and that's why a lot of you will see the seed tables I have, and on my shelving I've got these trays that all the seeds going, and if you haven't seen them, you will see them in the next video, so stay tuned for that. Like I said, I'm gonna have to refilm the b-roll for that now, over the next day or two, but that is coming for next week. But I want to talk about first, though, before we go on, a lot of people way overwater seedlings. Okay,
Yeah.
folks, what you have to understand is a seedling has got a tiniest root system, and they can't absorb, and they don't have the foliage to absorb all this water you're putting in, and this is what causes the damping off and things like that, all these fungal issues. The compost stays moist for too long, and this also comes down to your choice of seed cells or trays or pots as well. If you're potting in way too large a pot to start with, it's got more compost, more wet that it's got to try and absorb. You really need to size your containers appropriately for the size of the seedling that you have too. Okay, so just bear that in mind when you are watering. You don't want to be going piling it on thinking, oh, that'll do me for a few days now, because that's
Yeah.
when the fungal infections start. Okay, okay, okay. Tara Blinkholm. I have grown fruit and veg for 30 years, but just got my name on the list for an allotment. What is the
Oh,
one
nice.
piece of advice you could give an allotment newbie?
Well, and so I'll approach it from my perspective, because I think the basic information doesn't matter whether you're on an allotment or whether you've got a small yard. There's a lot of planning that needs to take place, and you can speak to this much more than I can. But whenever you're setting up a garden for the first time, take time to figure out where the best spot is for the beds. If you're going to have a polytunnel, where's the polytunnel going to go? How are you going to set up your watering system? Those are the same factors. And I just moved to my house a little over 3 years ago, and I spent 6 months figuring those kind of things out for my garden. And I've been gardening for 30 years as well. But I spent months making sure that where I was going to put my raised beds was the best location, and where I was going to put my greenhouse was the best location. And I'm on a long-term plan. I'm actually on a 5-year plan for the building of my garden. I don't think you have to do it all at once. Just phase it into the development of that plot after you've figured out what the various components are of that plot, and then just one day at a time start putting it together.
Yeah, and again, I mean, when you're using your garden, you think, right, okay, what I thought would be good here is no longer good here. So you're always adapting to make things easier and better for you. Like I said, I had a 14,000 litre water collection system
Yeah.
that was all linked up and everything else, and I thought that would do me. And then last summer told me I was wrong. so, so I've bought another 4,000 litres to go in that, so it's now an 18,000 litre.
Wow.
So these sort of things, you're always moving forward. And that's quite a good segue, I suppose, into talking. I'm just going to switch over a moment, Scott, bear with me, into my new book, guys, The Vegetable Garden. This will be a book that will talk about what Scott was just talking about, that talks to you about setting up an allotment from start to finish, not just in the structure that goes in the allotment, but walking you through an entire year from literally setting up your garden, all the structure, why you need it in this specific way, and this, that, and the other, right the way through to harvesting and seed collecting. And that's what this book is for. So anybody who's new to gardening or wants anything like that, this book is going to be available probably towards the end or beginning of next month. I've literally just had the files back for this book.
Nice.
And they've been sent off to the printing company and to Amazon. So it's literally, I just don't want to say it's available on Amazon and have the fuss that I had in the
Yeah.
last book. So until it's literally there, I'm just going to say it's towards the end of the month. But I have the
That's great.
files in my possession. They've been sent on, so it's just a case of them printing now and sending me copies so that I can double check the printing. But we're nearly there, folks. So that book will be available very, very shortly. But like I said, I wrote the book so that it walks you through getting your very first garden and what to do with a bare canvas, and to right the way to seed harvesting at the end. So, right. Garden of Whedon, Pam, I have a wild patch of raspberry canes. How can I tell whether summer or autumn?
And so it's all about when they start flowering and when they start fruiting. If you see the flowers developing on those canes in April or May, I'm guessing in your region, then those are the canes from the previous year. If they're not flowering on the canes until July or August, then those are the type of raspberries that flower in that first year. And it's basically as simple as that. You're also right in the color. And I actually grow red raspberries and black raspberries and yellow raspberries. And I've noticed, I'm trying to figure out how to work it into a video. I've been doing the footage for a couple years now. The yellow raspberries actually have a cane that when they're young has a yellowish color to it. And the red raspberry canes have a slight red tint, and the black raspberry canes have a much darker tint. That disappears in the second year. They basically become brown and they look older in that second year. So that's another way to tell is the brighter, younger color in the first year, and they typically depending on whether they're flowering for summer bearing or autumn bearing, you have to kind of remember that because that does impact how you're going to prune it for the
One,
next year.
yeah, I think one other way I would look at it as well is if you haven't pruned any of these yet, like if they are autumn bearing raspberries, they're gonna all have fruit on them. All,
Mhm.
not, like dried up, all the actual fruit stalks that they normally throw. They're going to be there all dried up. So if you can see every cane with where it showed that they're fruited, they're going to be autumn. But if you
Yeah.
see some that aren't or whatever, then they could possibly be summer varieties, and then you may have to go down the route of what Scott has said, waiting for them to flower and checking that way. But if they all have got, past fruiting showing, well, they're going to be all autumn. You could just cut them all to the ground because they've already fruited, and they will have fruited it within that one season. So that's another possible way as well. Okay. Growing plotty, Tony and Scott, what are your favourite varieties of raspberry? I inherited most of mine, so I don't know. I hear Joan J is really an autumn winner. I like Autumn Bliss myself, although I haven't
Okay.
got any anymore.
Uh, and so it just flew out of my head. I've tried a couple different varieties, and here in Colorado, we actually have a raspberry cane borer insect. And so I can't grow the summer bearing raspberries. I tried to do that in the past, and those raspberry cane borers laid their eggs, and the larvae started developing, and then the young crawled out. And over a period of a couple days, I lost literally every
Oh, wow.
single cane in my plot, because that's what the raspberry cane borer does. It eats it from the inside out. So what I've moved to is heritage, is actually the variety that I grow here, because it is the type that grows on the primocane, so I can chop it all down. And I've tried a couple other varieties, but for me, at least here in the States, that's one of the common varieties, the heritage, and it does quite well.
Cool. Okay. So Liz at the Mixing Bowl Homestead, should newly transplanted seedlings, brassicas mainly, be mulched or not?
I'm a proponent of mulch all the time, and avoid bare soil, especially with young seedlings. If you're putting seedlings outside, assuming you've hardened them off for a period of time, they're still trying to develop a root system. They're still trying to grow. And if that soil starts drying out, it just adds extra stress to those young seedlings. And so it doesn't need to be a thick mulch. It can just be a very light layer of dried grass clippings or whatever you have at hand. I like crushed leaves and straw and mix it all together. But yeah, absolutely. I think any seedling going in should start off with less stress, and the mulch helps reduce the stress.
What I find with gardeners is that they tend to try to put a finger up at how nature works. And if you look at a bare piece of soil, it doesn't stay bare for long. Nature covers it in weeds for a reason. That's to stop all of the evaporation of the moisture. It's to
Yeah.
stop erosion. It's for loads of different reasons, to protect the fauna in the ground. So and all the microbial life. Okay,
Oh, absolutely.
and it's the same thing when you're mulching in your garden. You're preventing all of those things. The microbial life's using it to feed on, which are supplying nutrients to your brassicas in this case. Okay, it's a win-win. And the main downside, what people worry about, is the likes of slugs and things like that. But
Yeah.
invariably, slugs tend, especially if you, depending on what you're using as a mulch, will tend to feed on the mulch firstly, depending what you're using. But the other thing about it is, if you've got healthy seedlings, the likelihood is the slugs are not even going to get to them at that point anyway. But nematodes are a fantastic way of dealing with slugs anyway. Just dump that down
Mhm.
as well, and you're away. Okay. Marv, 1984. Hi guys, I just planted some new primo canes and wondered
Good.
if I should now cut these to the ground or leave 2 foot of cane as they arrived.
So this is one of those situations that when I'm putting anything like that, like the blackberries or the raspberries, in for the first time, I leave that up, and it's only because we all have our habits and where we walk and where we pull the hose. And there have been too many times in my past where I put something like a raspberry in, cut the cane down, and then found myself walking across that space or dragging the hose across it and breaking off some of that new growth, just because it wasn't in my memory yet that there were actually plants growing there. And so I leave those reminders in place for the first year, just to get the habit established. Now, and that's just
Yeah,
me. You don't have to keep those in, but I've just found from experience
yeah,
it makes it easier to avoid breaking the new growth.
yeah. Marv, it's not going to affect the plants either way, whatever you do with them. Those canes are effectively dead. So it won't affect the plant. But like Scott has said, it's a reminder to you that that plant is there.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Um, oh,
And also mulch those raspberries as well.
yeah.
It's a great opportunity to start off, put those primocanes in, mulch that area, and then you can do the fencing or trellising or whatever later on.
Scott, Chris wants to jump in your suitcase.
Okay. I live in Colorado. This is one of the most beautiful areas of the world, and particularly the United States. So
Chris is
jump in
in
a
Canada,
suitcase.
so she'll probably just hop across the border, jump in your case for you to bring her across
Yeah.
here.
And so there's a lot of tourists to come here first, and we can tour Colorado, and then I'll have to get some new suitcases, I guess,
There you are,
and then we'll
Chris.
fly over the
Sorted.
pond and have a big group.
Get one with wheels. Right. Okay.
Definitely.
So Danny's saying, Scott, you're welcome anytime.
Oh, good.
Right. Uh, Lockie, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Are either of you guys growing anything new this year? Something you haven't done before? We've covered that already. But is there anything else you're growing this year?
So the super hot peppers, those super hot chilies are high on my list of what I'm going to do. I'm growing in a new way. So we have the green stock vertical planter here in the States, and I'm going to take one of those and have basically 6 levels of those little pots, all of it basil, and I'm going to grow 6 different types of basil. And so that's kind of a new approach where I'm growing new types of basil or basil for you, and I'm planning on making a ton of pesto and using it in cooking, but also just for the visual of the purple basil and the Thai basil and the Italian basils and French basils and whatever basil I can find. So that's not necessarily a new plant because I grow basil every year, but there are new varieties that I'm growing because I just want an explosion of that plant.
Right. Even though I got his name wrong, Lockie, whoever it is, I'm sorry. But thank you very much for your super chat. Lockie's just donated $10
Oh, nice.
to the live stream as well. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so and that's it. I think, I've grown them before, but I stopped growing them for not lack of space, but lack of time. And this year I'm probably going to grow more melons again because
Okay.
I do miss having those fruit available to me. So they will be back on the list for me. So
Good.
Francis, what problems will I encounter if I try to move my raspberry patch?
It's easy. It is so easy. In fact, I got a video that I did, I think last year, that I show exactly how to do it because it is so easy. You can do it. In fact, the raspberries that I have growing, the red raspberries, came from my last house. And the raspberries from that house came from the previous house. And that's how easy it is. The raspberries are so durable and hardy that when they start sending out, because they'll propagate from underground and the roots start spreading, then they'll send up the new canes. And I just dig up those new canes, I pot them up, and then move them to a new area. And I've been doing that for a couple decades now.
And that's the only problem with moving them, is that you always get some that will pop back up afterwards. So if you want to
Sure.
just move them all completely, you find, oh, like I'm turning this bed now into a flower bed, and you're going to find raspberry canes coming up in the middle of
For
it.
a few years.
Yeah, yeah, that's the only real problem with it. So cool. Okay, hi to both of you. Is fish blood and bone feed okay for all fruit bushes? Um, I would say most fruit bushes. I wouldn't say for the likes of blueberry and things like that. They need more of an acidic food rather than blood, fish, and bone. But you could use it on them. What's your thoughts, Scott?
It I'll give a big depends on this because it depends on whether you have cats or dogs or wild animals in your area, because it tends to be easy for vegetable gardeners to use those type of fertilizers because we can put over the fabric or the material to cover our beds and keep the animals out of them. But for those more permanent plantings, like the fruit bushes and the perennial vegetables, I've had a problem with that in the past where where raccoons will come in, and that was a big issue I had at the school garden. The raccoons would come and dig up the beds anytime we used a blood meal or a bone meal or a fish emulsion. And in a previous garden, I had a dog that destroyed most of the garden one night. And that was the first time I'd used fish emulsion in that garden. And so if you have those type of animals, I would caution against in an open landscape garden, like with the fruit bushes, unless you can protect those plants, you might want to stay away from those kind of fertilizers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite a big advocate of blood fish and bone here because I use it for the potatoes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But my garden doesn't have those issues. The biggest issue I have, the occasional cat coming over and some birds, you know. So we don't have possums, we don't have raccoons,
Right.
we don't have prairie dogs and all sorts of other things. You know, we aren't going to worry about most of those. You know, occasionally we'll get moles and rats and things like that that we need to contend with. So I don't have that. So again, I suppose, again, your location is something
Yeah.
you want to take into account as well with that. Okay.
But I use all those as well in my vegetable gardening because I do have much more control over where my dog goes and where the other animals go. They do have a good purpose if you need fertilization.
Give me 1 second for this one. I just grabbed something.
So I'll look at the camera and talk while Tony's away for the moment. Not sure how he's going to be gone. I'm glad you guys can all be here today, and I appreciate your support. Make sure you do the thumbs up. Tony was talking about it before, but we've had people come online. So give a thumbs up and buy Tony's book next month as well.
Thank you for that. Right, so Deanne has asked, how do you go about killing fungus gnats inside the house and in the garden? They're everywhere. So,
And so if you understand the life cycle of the fungus gnat, and the reason it's called a fungus gnat is because in the surface of the soil, it gets moist, the fungi starts growing, and the gnat finds that environment and it's ideal. And so if you allow the surface to dry out periodically, even for just a very short period of time, that's usually enough to stop the cycle. And then I use those little yellow sticky traps, just those little pieces of paper that have that sticky material on them. And that's another great way to get rid of the ones that are already in place.
yeah, it's really good tips there. And the watering issue is your biggest issue. Okay, you're overwatering. You're not letting that soil dry. I mean, if you look at this room, I have plants everywhere, all over the place, even all up there. Look, okay.
Plants.
Plants everywhere in here. There are no fungus gnats because I control that watering. The other thing is the medium you're using as well. So if you're, it depends on what you're growing, but if you're using something that stays damp a lot, like coir, and it's always constantly wet because you're obviously overwatering, then you're going to have those problems. Now,
Yeah.
if you have an infestation like you're saying, there is a way of dealing with that, and that is to include some hydrogen peroxide in the water and do a drench on each of your plants. And what this will do is it will kill all the larvae that's in your soil. And then all you've got to deal with is the adults. They won't be able to lay any more eggs because hydrogen peroxide will prevent them from doing that, and that will sort out any issues you have as far as an infestation. But that will only solve it for a short period. If you don't get the watering right, they'll just come straight back. Okay, so
And vermiculite is a good option too. If you're struggling with getting the watering right, you could just put a very small layer, 1/4 inch of vermiculite on top, and that's going to dry out faster than the cocoa coir is going to dry out. And that can help you figure out your watering pattern and get rid of the gnats at the same time.
great. Buy yourself a watering test meter, you know, for to see how hydrated your soil is, And if it's, because a lot of people are guessing, they think, oh, I need a schedule for watering, so I'm going to water once or twice a week, where your soil might already be wet enough. So get something like that as well. Chris is saying I can drive to Colorado.
Okay. Bring your own suitcase.
Yeah. So Liz, Gardner Scott, what's the new type of squash you're growing this year?
And so it's a delicata squash. I think it's a honey, honey gold or something like that. And I just recently got the seed, so I haven't spent a lot of time trying to remember the name of it. But it is a cream colored squash that has dark green vertical lines that go around it. And I grew it last year, and just the flavor was incredible. And so now I'm doing, maybe it's honey bear, maybe it's a honey bear delicata squash, honey something. And I had mentioned in a recent video that I'm not doing a lot of my other squashes. I'm not doing yellow squash this year. I'm really focusing on the delicata so that I don't have to worry about cross pollination, because my plan is to save these seeds so that for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, I'll have all of the delicata squash seeds that I want. And then I can go back to growing some of the other types of squash that I've grown in the past.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people need to get on top of now is seed saving and
Yeah.
controlling your garden. I don't know if you're having this issue at the moment in the States, Scott, but in the UK at the moment, you can't buy a tomato. There is no tomatoes.
In the store?
In the stores,
Oh,
supermarkets are
wow.
totally out, and we're not just talking tomatoes. I have photos on my phone of my local superstore, and over 3/4 of the vegetables were out of stock.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and
We don't
you,
have that yet.
yeah.
Some of the
So
big growing regions, I don't know if it has made the news over in the UK, but California is just being hammered by snow and ice and terrible weather. And so we don't have that problem right now, but it's conceivable in a couple
yeah, you
months
will.
that we might,
Yeah.
just because our big growing
And I
areas are
think because
being hit.
like we import a lot from the likes of Spain and France and things like that, I think that's where they've had bad weather, and I think that's where the biggest part of the issue is coming from. But you know, this is the good thing about gardening is you've grown all your own stuff, you save your own seed, you're in control, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the shops, you've got it. Now granted,
That's
we
right.
haven't got tomatoes this time of year, but we've got plenty frozen, so if I want tomato sauce, I can go and take that out and make tomato
Yeah.
sauce or whatever the case being. The only thing I don't have right at this second is fresh tomatoes, but it's not a major issue.
Well, but you can live with that. It here, I can't tell you the last time I bought a tomato at the superstore, because they taste so bad and their texture is so terrible. I just do without them
Yeah,
for 6 months out of the year
absolutely.
because I grow them myself. And so you can modify your diet to some degree and just not.
Yeah, my point was that what you're going to find now, though, is where people are struggling to buy fruit and veg here,
Oh, sure.
they're going to start growing, which will mean people will be buying seed right, left, and center. You may not be able to get it. You don't know what's going to happen further down the line, and by saving your own seed, you take that issue away as well, because you've now got your own seed, you can grow your own tomatoes. Whereas
Absolutely.
if people can't buy them and they think, right, I'm going to grow them and then go and buy like 10 packets of seed do you know what I'm saying? It,
Oh,
it
yeah.
could potentially cause a seed shortage later on this year or next year or whatever the case being. So it's just things to think about, when we are gardening. But it is something that we have been seeing for a few weeks here, where
I'm sorry to
and
hear
some
that.
of the supermarkets are now limiting people to like 3 items of what they have got. So it's crazy. So growing plotty, I just planted a blackcurrant and I went a bit mad and
Oh.
dug in well-rotted manure, a little Epsom salts and some mycorrhizal fungi. Will it be okay? I just chucked everything off the top shelf at it.
Um, It probably will. I love currants. I've got both red and black currants. It's one of my favorite fruits to grow. And my soil is terrible. I did not amend the soil. I did not add Epsom salts because I'm a believer in mulch and allowing those perennial fruit bushes and trees because their roots are going to spread. So I can't amend a big enough space where those roots are going to to grow. So I'll top dress the soil. I'll put compost on top of the soil along with an organic mulch, and mine do just fine. So I would say what you've done is probably more than you needed to do, but currants in general are just such a tough plant that they'll overcome anything that we fail to do to support them.
So what I would say here is just bear in mind that you probably haven't done a soil test from what I'm gathering, so you don't know if your soil is lacking in anything anyway. But the last thing you want to do, which is what this is going to do, is create an environment where that plant is going to keep all its roots in one spot, and it's not going to push them out into the surrounding soils. And that makes for a very weak plant because it's feeding off what's there. The root ball is only that, and then you only need a good storm and it's blown out of the ground. What you need is that plant to send its roots out into the surrounding soils looking for water and things like that. Because what you're doing is you're putting all your eggs in one basket here, and if that section dries out for any reason, well, it can't get water from anywhere else. It can't get nutrients from anywhere else. You've got to treat these sorts of plants quite mean in the beginning. You've got to force them to send the root system out looking for it. Because if you give them everything that it needs in one place, it's never going to do that. So just bear that in mind.
That child that never leaves home.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind, and that's especially with plants. I see people going out watering, plants, every single day, and they're just giving it a little light watering, and water it deep, make those roots go down, and then hold back on the watering so that they have to go down for it. It makes for much stronger plants, guys. Okay, so just bear that in mind for the next ones. Don't think that you've got to give them all of this stuff. I just replanted 2 trees that I dug out the polytunnel that we were talking about earlier on. They had no feed at all put in with them. They just went straight in the ground because I want them to send that root system straight out. And one thing I will say as well, while we're on that subject, if you are transplanting any bushes, trees, fruit bushes, things like that, dig a square hole. If you dig a round hole, the roots are just going to go round in circles like this. If you dig a square hole, once it hits a corner, it's got to push out into that soil. All right? Okay.
And that's relatively new. I was speaking with a group of master gardeners here in the States recently, and was talking about how conventional wisdom and what's recommended changes over time.
Yeah.
And so 20 years ago, I was taught how to plant a tree differently than I was taught 10 years ago. And that has evolved. Most of the trees that I've planted in my gardens over the decades have been in a round hole. But now, yes, the conventional wisdom and the recommendations are square holes. And that's what I'm doing as we evolve and learn more.
It's like everything else, though, Scott. We learn, don't we? Once we used to think the Earth was the center of the universe. So but we take things, we learn from them, and we find better ways of doing things. That information's passed on, and in 5 years' time, someone else is going to find an even better way that a triangle hole is even better, or something. But it's at the moment that does make a lot of sense. It's going to hit that corner. It has to push those roots out. So, yeah, cool. Right. Richard Preston. Hi, gents. It's my first year growing garlic. Looking lovely, but a few yellow leaves. And the end look a little burnt, frost damage. Should I just leave those leaves alone or give a trim?
And so I'm a lazy gardener for the most part. And so those yellow leaves are on their path to dying, and then they'll dry up, and they're not adding anything to the plant right now, but they're really not taking anything away from the plant. And I've seen too many, especially new gardeners, try to trim and end up cutting something that they shouldn't have cut. And so most of the time with all my alliums, with the onions, with the garlic, if those outer leaves are yellowing and dying, I just leave them on the plant. And and it depends on where you are, because that's actually what you're looking for later in the season as you get closer to the harvest, is you're expecting that that's going to happen, and that's an indication that the garlic is getting close to harvest time. But it could be rains, it could be all kinds of issues that just too wet right now. And so I would be more concerned that that's an indicator that the soil is too wet, or that there's another issue there, and try to figure out why the leaves are yellowing before you just jump out and trim them off.
Yeah, typically you tend to see it after winter anyway. You're putting a garlic in November, December time, whatever the case is. We have a lot of rain through the winter time. That's washing nutrients out of the ground, and that's going to affect the garlic to some extent. But people worry about the leaves of garlic, and there's not really a need to, because we're more concerned over the bulb. So,
Mhm.
as the plant, all the plant is doing is going, do you know what? I'm pulling the nutrients out of these leaves. I don't need them. Okay. So I'm going to take what nutrients I can, and they're going to put them into new leaf growth, and it's going to shed those leaves. Don't worry about it. They'll just peel down. They'll be fine. All right.
And it's the same case for your chilies and for your tomatoes and everything else. Those very first leaves that are low on those plants, they're going to yellow and drop off the same way.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
just a normal life cycle.
Delicata are amazing. A perfect keto substitute for other higher carb
All
squash.
right.
Makes excellent oven fries. There you go. So that's off Chris. And another one off Chris. Cherry tomato growing in my grow tent. Should be eating them in about a month. Wow, Chris.
Oh,
So
nice.
Chris getting some early ones. Steve Soames, can I use any fruit tree to train along my fence line?
No, uh, you can do most, but there are trees that do better. So if you're doing the espalier, or if you're doing a cordon, you need to choose the kind of fruit trees whose branches are growing in the way that you want to train them. And so uh, many trees will work, but there's a reason why apple trees and pear trees are used for some of those kind of cordon systems, because they're just ideal. And there's a reason that you're not seeing nut trees that are being used for that same reason. It's
Yeah,
all about how the branches grow and whether you can prune them into the shape you want.
it needs to be a spur fruiting
Exactly.
tree. So as long, it don't matter what variety it is, as long as they're spur fruiting, then you'll be fine. Okay, that's all of the questions, Scott, and
Okay.
we're at the top of the hour on the second live stream, so we've done okay there. So guys, Scott, why don't you tell everybody, about where they can find you and everything? There is a link below, but this is your chance to tell everybody who you are, what you're about, and we can go from there.
Well, I'm at Gardner Scott. And so the Gardner Scott channel, and you can just do the typical YouTube search of Gardner Scott. And I've got hundreds of videos just like Tony does. And that'll at least point you in the right direction. I do a live stream like this every Monday. For you, it happens at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And over here in the States, it's 9 o'clock in the morning in my mountain time. And then I do a couple videos every week that just keep getting cranked out. And of course, like Tony, I'm always interested in the community around gardening and helping to answer the questions. So if you make a comment, and most of you know this, if you're a viewer of mine, if you make a comment on my video, chances are I'm going to answer that question pretty quickly. So that's what I do, and that's how I do it. And yeah, check out Gardner Scott. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And there's a link in the description if you want to just click straight on that, guys. Right, Scott, thanks very much for that. Just have 5, mate, and I'll come back to you now.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate being here. Thank you for all the questions.
Sorry to cut him off then. Right, let's just remove this chat. I didn't realize that was still on there. So, which one was that? That one. Right. So, guys, I hope that you've got some sort of information out of this today, and I'm sorry that we've had all of the issues. Like I said, I am back filming now, which has been really nice to be in the garden. Now I've shook this respiratory, or more or less shook this respiratory infection. Unfortunately, you would have had a video tomorrow, but I've now got to go and refilm what I filmed. So, but that's the joys of creating content for you. So we will have another live stream now next week. That will probably be on Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. So again, just keep an eye out for the video, and I'll put that up. I'll schedule that in for you guys, and I haven't decided what that's going to be about. But the video that would have been out tomorrow will now be out on either Tuesday or Friday this week. I haven't decided yet. But I hope you all have a fantastic week. Get out there, get your hands in the soil, get sowing, get those last jobs done. Because I tell you now, as soon as sowing really gets off in earnest and you're up there watering and everything else, this next 3 months are going to be busy. Get the jobs done now. And I'm sure you guys will see me over on Danny's channel very shortly, because Sunday I'm going over there to help him to reskin one of his tunnels. So that'll be an interesting day, especially as he doesn't listen. I told him not to build anything, and he went and put all the staging together. But hey, that's just Danny for you. So, but he'll be having a pop there, yeah. But we're gonna have a polytunnel day up there, so he better get his log burner on and cook me some bacon to go in my bread that I'm going to bring with me. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.